And we welcome everybody here at WKYC.com and YouTube. I'm Dave Dino DeNatale, and I am so pleased for the second week in a row as the vice presidential debate is going on this Wednesday night to be joined by some of our panelists. If you were with us last week for the presidential debate in Cleveland, Tiffany Tarpley and I were pleased to have a 7-member panel with us. We have convened 3 of those members and asked them to come back with us tonight to join us for a discussion about what we've seen in the vice presidential debate and maybe a few lingering thoughts from last week and kind of putting a bow on what we saw between President Trump and Vice President Biden. I'm Dave Dino DeNatale. Shari Nacson is with us. Also, Michael Carr is with us. They are both supporters and voters, or soon-to-be voters, if you will, of Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris. And Zahi Abi Younes is with us as well. He is leaning towards voting for President Trump. I am so pleased that the 3 of you are back with me. Let's start tonight, and anybody can jump in. For the first hour or so that Vice President Pence and Kamala Harris have been talking, it's been a much different tone and tenor than it was about 8 days ago. Have you gotten more sense as voters about the issues and things that you care about tonight, maybe more so than last week?
I definitely feel like I'm getting more information about the issues tonight. I think that last week, all of the interrupting and talking over was so distracting. And there's still an interrupting issue tonight, which is frustrating, but I'm definitely getting more content about the differences between the 2 possible administrations.
I certainly believe so. Now, in the opening statements, one of the first things that was said was Americans deserve a discussion that's civil. And I think really civility is at the center of what's going on here. And not only a question that was looming, I think, around these debates, because I found the last ones to be highly antagonistic, but it's also a question that kind of looms over the current state of the country as well. I mean, we're continually inundated right now with divisive images between the political parties, between police and protesters, between anti-maskers and the rest of the American people. So I think civility itself was at the core of these debates, and I think they addressed it much better than the last debates. I think there was definitely room for progress, but I think there was a much better and healthier conversation and more for the American people to get out of this.
Yes, and I second that, Michael. The level of civility and semi-respect, because there were a little bit of heated moments, but it's definitely something that, you know, when the presidential candidates were debating, I had difficulty even taking notes to see what either candidate were trying to portray to the American people. But I mean, I took a lot of notes today. I mean, kudos to both of them. Much respect. We touched on climate change. We touched on the healthcare. We touched on the economy. I mean, which is great, and it helps any voter make a decision or get closer to a decision.
It's interesting because tonight, the moderator mentioned, no matter who wins next month, when we get to Inauguration Day in January 2021, one of these 2 are going to be the vice president of the oldest person to ever be inaugurated as president, either Donald Trump for a 2nd term or Joe Biden for a 1st term. As voters, you know, I think this is important. A lot of times when the vice presidential debate happens, it's not very exciting. People are like, oh, whatever. The stakes are pretty high even tonight as we watch these 2 go at it, because, you know, you sit there and you say that this really, one of these 2 people could be the next president of the United States in 2024 or beyond that. Who knows?
Well, and I think with President Trump's health issues of the past week, I think that's been brought home, you know, for everyone, that, you know, there is a vulnerability there and a concern about, I mean, we know with COVID that age is a variable that makes people much more vulnerable. So it's strange to think that, you know, that I don't know that there's ever been an election where we thought so hard about, what would happen if either of these two individuals was the successor. I think usually it's thought of as an appointment, and then they go on and have their career, whatever that may be. And I think given the past week, people are definitely thinking more about if a president's health was not well, what would we do?
Now, I want to piggyback on what Shari said as well. I think that in general, the health of the president has always been a topic that we've used to define the presidency. Even back when Obama was president, one of the youngest presidents that we have had, there was a lot of note-taking of how much he aged in the presidency. And I think that's pointing towards how difficult the office actually is itself. Mm-hmm. And I think right now, especially with Donald Trump having contracted the coronavirus, and there's a lot of, I would say, misinformation or a lot of information that we're not entirely sure of coming out of that conflict, I think it's really kind of highlighted this point during this debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so respectfully, during the Obama days, it was more about how the presidency helped age President Obama more than it was a subject prior to the election. So I think, sadly, and I'm going to be very fair here, sadly, I know, with President Trump's, health issues and, some of which say that Joe Biden isn't as focused as he used to be. But, it never mattered when Roosevelt won in a landslide. It never mattered that, Abraham Lincoln had severe suicidal depression and Mashram syndrome. It didn't matter that Ronald Reagan had a glass eye. So all these, it did not matter till now. So that's just, and if you notice, both vice president candidates dodged the question about health. They didn't answer.
Yeah.
The question was specific. If something would happen to the president, how would you step in? Sell us yourself. And I think they both dodged the question, being fair.
They did. I have to say, I did not know that Ronald Reagan had a glass eye, so I'm going to be looking that up.
You can fact check me.
I will. That's fascinating that I never knew that. I wonder about that question because it's also kind of socially hard to answer that question, right? Like it feels almost disrespectful to say, well, what would I do if this person were incapacitated? And certainly I would love to hear either of these two candidates say, we've had that conversation and this is what we would do. And in truth, most professions have to have that conversation. As a social worker, I have to appoint a legal custodian of my files to take care of stuff if I can't do my stuff. So most professions have that. So I agree with you that the conversation, a lot of the debate conversations do that, though. They pivot to talk about their talking points and they're not using the question the way that it was asked. So
I think that in general, if we look back at all those presidents, and you've made some good examples of different presidents who have had some kind of health concern. Unfortunately, during the presidency, all of those things were hidden from the public. And there's multiple other examples of things that are being hidden from the public because the president obviously doesn't want to come off as being weak. As far as I think the lining of some of these questions, especially this question about the health of the president, there's nowhere, unfortunately, to go with it. You can't exactly make a kind of zinger or a point or get something across. And I think that was a weak question, which allowed very good opportunity to deflect or put a framework where you can guide where the conversation was going. And I think both of these candidates took that as a very good opportunity to kind of guide where they wanted to take this, because we have to remember that these debates are really held only to 1 hour, and to put a whole framework for how you're going to run the American economy and country within an hour is extremely difficult to do. Answering a question that isn't going to bring you and give that type of zinger or power is really going to be difficult within that time frame.
Yeah.
Let me ask. So good. Go ahead, Zahi. Go ahead.
No. I mean, I agree with Michael. I mean, during the days there was no social media, there were no selfies, there were no broadcasting. There was, and it was hidden due to, showing that the president is strong and is not weak. And I agree that question was a freebie for both. Like, hey, talk about yourself, because they both wanted to dodge it, and rightfully so. But I want to say, I trust in the system. So God forbid any candidate that wins, whether it's Joe Biden or President Trump, I trust in the system. I trust in the framework of the United States to move forward with our government. We're not going to fall apart.
Right. I think that's true, that there's always a succession plan, and people have the information that they need to have.
When everything happened Friday, we were all waking up Friday morning, and we heard that President Trump, the First Lady, both had tested positive for COVID. As the days have gone by, members of the White House staff have been diagnosed, the Republican National Committee chairperson, a couple of senators, some of it going back maybe to the Supreme Court announcement in the Rose Garden a few days before the debate. Just what were your thoughts as all that kind of played out? I mean, there's just moments of, I have to, I have to sit, I have to work, and I have to think about everything, and I can't put it in perspective until afterwards. But just as you're going through your day, and oh my God, the president is ill, and we don't know how ill. How are you guys coping with this as voters, as citizens, that your president is ill in the hospital like that?
I was appalled. I was appalled when they revealed that he hadn't had his COVID test before the debate. Like, that just was shocking to me. That I don't understand not following safety protocols, and especially that one. And so I was shocked. I was angry about the exposure of others. My daughter having had COVID, and she had a long haul. I identified with even this, like, oh, he's getting better. Well, you know what? She got better, and then she got really, really worse. Like, there's a delay, and people think they're recovering, and it gets worse. So I don't actually think we're out of the woods yet. But honestly, I thought it fit with disrespecting the rules, disrespecting tax rules, disrespecting debate rules, disrespecting, just basic social manners. It fit with all of these other things that there's so much disrespect conveyed in not protecting each other. And I mean, it's just such a low point, and for our country, I mean, it's a disgrace, honestly. And so, yes, there's a concern about well-being and safety and recovery, but as a citizen, I just thought it was one of the most disrespectful things that could have possibly happened during a pandemic in that particular setting.
I think for me personally, I was a bit more concerned with the political fallout that this would have. So Trump contracting the virus himself wasn't too surprising to me. I mean, you have a very problematic president, for instance, in Brazil, who thinks coronavirus is a hoax, saying the same thing, not wearing masks, not social distancing, also having contracted the virus itself. So I'm not very surprised that this is happening within the administration. It has happened before. Now, I was a bit concerned about the political fallout for this, and that means that what happens is not going to be good for the American people one way or another. Should Trump actually die of the coronavirus, the question is going to be if the elections are going to be carried out in a smooth process, and if actually democracy would have been had, because people would no longer be voting for Trump or voting him out of office should that happen. The other point of it is looking at how the media and how the political parties are going to take all of this information and spin it in every which way that they can. For instance, Trump going out and doing some kind of wave parade while he was in the hospital is purely for political purposes and purely trying to manage damage control by having contracted the virus. And when these instances occur and they start getting taken over for political favors from either side of the aisles, I think it's really problematic than really starting to focus on the issues that we have and managing the coronavirus itself.
Mm-hmm.
To me, honestly, it was concerning from a sense that the way I was raised, and my belief is that I don't wish any sort of ill will against anyone. So even had any, candidate contracted the coronavirus, I would still be concerned. Now, again, I trust in the system and I trust in the government. And, one of the things to keep the peace and to get to the next stage, God forbid any candidate or president would go through, God forbid, death, is that, to maintain the peace, you need a strong army and a strong, police force. That's the first thing to avoid chaos. And what's concerning is, sometimes if you want to talk about defunding the police, well, they're the first line of defending us, God forbid, had, a president or a candidate, pass. But I want to just point out one interesting thing that Senator Harris said, and I don't know if this was news to you, but she was talking about January 28th, the administration was told that the virus is airborne. I don't know about you, but I was never told it was airborne. I didn't know it was airborne till right now, to be honest. I was still, with all the social awareness that's going on, that, it could live on a flat top for X amount of time, and if it's airborne, why aren't we wearing masks today? Why aren't both vice president candidates wearing masks? It's airborne. They're in a closed place. Mm-hmm. That's what's concerning, is where are we going with this whole health thing? We need clarification. Mm-hmm. That's it. But, I was, checking up on how the president was doing and how, everyone that talked to him, how he was doing, how they were doing, because he did speak with both spectrums. So
I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned, and I know this isn't the topic that we were on, but you mentioned defunding the police, and I want to be really clear that that movement isn't about stripping the police of all funding. It's about demilitarizing the police and making a decision to reallocate funding away from weaponry and into services that actually support the community and allow alternate ways of responding, as opposed to overpowering citizens with weapons. And I think that's really important. And I understand, I guess I'm not sure that I understand how a president dying relates to that particular topic. But I did feel that I wanted to clarify that piece. It's not slashing budgets like entirely. It's saying, let's be more deliberate and let's reallocate dollars in a thoughtful and strategic way, and really addressing this issue of excessive use of force by law enforcement.
And going on a little bit of what Shari's saying right now with the defund police. So I've lived in countries like South Africa that overly focus on security. So South Africa spends more than 50% of its funds on security. And you can see what happens to an economy when it does that. And the amount of security that we're spending are more cognizant of countries like South Africa, countries like Russia, countries like Brazil, who have massive endemic problems within their own borders. Now, we in the United States, a lot of the major cities we have are spending more than 50% of their budget on police enforcement, right? The Department of Education specifically has already written papers on the fact that overinvestment in security versus overinvestment in education are going to have long-term detrimental effects towards our educational system. Where do we rank? 30th out of 40 countries in the OECD. So it's very easy to see that the fact that we're spending a lot of money on security, we're not spending a lot of money on healthcare. Our healthcare system is terrible. We're not spending money on education. Our educational system is hugely problematic. And at the same time, the type of interaction that people of color have in the United States, and I have many, many examples of this if you want to hear some ridiculousness, is very different than those approaches you have in other countries. So I've lived in Germany for 7 years. My interactions with police officers in Germany, one, they were never armed. And that's something you don't think about here in the United States, is that when you jaywalk, then an armed person is going to approach you, right? These are the first things that we have to start considering, that the way that we think that is normal in this country is not very normal at all when you go to other countries.
Zahi, I'll let you have the last word, because I just looked at the time. We gotta run here. We're gonna have more from this panel tonight, and what's next at 11 o'clock on 3 News here. But Zahi, I'll let you have the last word, and then we'll say goodbye here for tonight.
Okay, well, just actually three things, and I'll be really quick. First, Shari, I was referring to the fact of just in case there is chaos, that
Okay.
we would need some sort of dividing factor or forceful factor. But I do agree with both of you that we do need reform. Absolutely, with the police, we absolutely. I have no doubt. We have to allocate funds. Bearing in mind certain situations in certain states, and there's a lot of money that could be spent, and unfortunately, a lot of politics play into it because, like for example, the SWAT team was created just because there were drug cartels that they wanted to fight that had a lot of ammunition and a lot of guns, so they had to create a police task force that is SWAT. But one last thing about the concerning health situation of the president, and I agree with Michael. It bummed me out because I didn't want to lose any other debates or any future debates, and I was afraid that if we get tested or they get tested and there's a situation where we can't go through the second debate or the third debate, then that leaves a lot of voters that could say, you know what, I didn't get enough. I don't know who to vote to, and then they can't represent themselves and they can't vote, or they won't vote.
This has been our all-star panel. You guys are the best. I appreciate you coming back on. I hope I can call you up again here, maybe as we have future debates and as we get closer to election night, we can reconvene and talk about these issues more. Zahi Abi Younes, that's Michael Carr, that's Shari Nacson, our all-star panel on the vice presidential debate night. Thank you all for joining us here on WKYC.com and YouTube.